Welcome, everyone. We are very excited to be here with you this evening. As we get started, I just wanted to say for a moment, we really apologize for some technical difficulties. We thought we had all the tech worked out for this evening, and then, of course, there was a glitch and things did not work the way that we wanted it to. But happy to say we do have it working and up and running now. And so we appreciate your patience and holding on for a few minutes for us to get started. But we are launching this evening, as you all know, our first edition of Inside the Impact, which is an opportunity for us to take you inside in a way to learn a little bit more about the work that we're doing in the community to support survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And so I'm really excited because I have a guest with us today that's going to talk a lot about the work that she does in supporting survivors in the community, but also about, one of the really important pillars of things that we do is working to prevent violence before it occurs so that we can have less and less individuals that need to reach out and access our services. So I am Kathy Mull. I am the Executive Director of the Cocoon, and I'm going to let my guest introduce herself in just a minute and talk a little bit more about the work that she does. But we are also really hoping for this evening to have this be something that's very interactive. And so as we, again, sort of give you a behind the curtain inside look into the work that we're doing around violence prevention in the community, if at any point in time that you have anything that you want to add to the conversation, any questions, anything that you specifically want us to talk about this evening, please feel free to jump in and share that information. Put it in the chat. If you're joining us by Zoom, you can put it in the comment section on our Facebook page. If you're watching live with us, we have a couple of folks that are going to be watching those areas, and we'll be able to help make sure that we get back to all of your questions and comments as we go through this evening. So my guest this evening is Piper. Piper is our prevention educator here at the Cocoon. So welcome, and thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited about the launch of this new program. I think it's going to be a really cool interactive experience for people who either support the Cocoon or are learning more about it.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I think sometimes, that we talk about the work that we do, but there are so many facets and components and pieces to the work that we do that sometimes we don't have a lot of opportunity to kind of dive in and dig a little bit deeper into the work. And so I am also excited to be able to share with folks and give them a little bit more insight and knowledge into how the work that we do really impacts the community. So I don't know if you want to just maybe start with a little bit of an introduction and share a little bit about yourself with our viewers today.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I am Piper Nelson. I am the prevention educator here at the Cocoon. I've been at the Cocoon for a little over a year now, which is very exciting. And essentially, my work, I like to say, is I am anywhere that people are. So I do work within the community in a plethora of different ways to equip community members with tools to collectively move towards a violence-free community. So whether that is within their places of employment, within their schools, within their clubs and organizations, or the things that they're involved with. We try to have a face in all of those different areas, explain kind of what the Cocoon is, give some educational presentations and trainings based off of domestic and sexual violence and kind of healthier habits, healthy relationships, to, educate individuals.
And I think that the work that the prevention program does, and you specifically as our prevention educator, is really a critical piece of the work that we are doing in the community. And so I think we spend a lot of time, and I think that there's a lot of knowledge out there about what we're doing to support survivors in the aftermath of violence and the different types of services that we provide. But I think just as much as those services are really critical, there's a significant arm of work that we do that is about prevention, right? How are we getting out in the community and having conversations about what is violence in our communities look like? What are some of the ways that we can work to actively either mitigate or prevent violence from occurring in the first place? And so I think that it's a pretty well-known idea around the building, around the office, around those of us who are doing this work that, ultimately we'd really like to work ourselves out of a job. Right. And we can only do that by doing the prevention work. So excited to have you here today to kind of help us dig a little bit deeper into that. So before we talk specifically about the work and what you're providing for the community. Can you maybe share a little bit about, I know you said you've been at the Cocoon a little over a year now, but what really kind of drew you to this work? What do you kind of bring to the table as the prevention educator?
Yeah, so I first kind of got involved in this kind of work slash first heard about the Cocoon when I came to Bowling Green State University for school. I earned two degrees. One is my Bachelor's of Science in Criminal Justice, and the other is my Bachelor's of Science in Social Work. But I knew with those two degrees that I always wanted to work with bigger communities. The one-on-one just really wasn't for me. I knew I wanted to educate and I wanted to look at more systemic issues within those fields and see how we can each play a part in achieving whatever goals were of the discipline. So, within social work, within the justice system, within domestic and sexual violence or whatnot. So, as I, earned my degrees at BG, I started to really find my place and I found my place within prevention. So when I was doing my field placement for social work, my internship, I was a prevention intern for Equitas Health Toledo, which is a HIV/AIDS organization to help people who are going through HIV or folks within the community to equip them with tools to prevent HIV and STDs and such as that. And I had a wonderful experience at my internship. And I knew that I wanted to keep doing prevention, that I had definitely found my place. I had definitely, found my passion for this. So when I heard that the Cocoon was hiring for a prevention educator, I was over the moon because as I was going through my undergraduate degree, I also helped a lot with the Cocoon as a volunteer and also as someone who worked closely with the former prevention educator and the communications individual to help plan events on campus. And so I had some really cool opportunities to do that. And being familiar with the work, I just knew that I had to, apply for this job because I had definitely found my place within doing so. And I think prevention is kind of the lesser known side of social work and the lesser known side of social services. When we think social services, not just the Cocoon, but any sort of services, we tend to think that one-on-one, boots on the ground work, which is so important. But, for those individuals who are not necessarily directly going through domestic or sexual violence, there is still things they can do to help the mission. And that's where I kind of found my spark is helping that side of things.
So thinking through for you, like why prevention? Like why do we need to do it? Why is it something that you are obviously very passionate about? And so why does it matter?
I think for me and why I love prevention so much is because it truly is everyone. It takes everyone. It's like you're not working with a certain demographic or a certain group of people or a certain, educational background or whatnot. It is truly every single person. And I like how prevention kind of brings communities together, right? We are all playing our part in, moving towards a violence-free future. And I love the fact that every day is different, right? I can be working with kindergarteners and trying to teach them, red flags and green flags, or I could be working at the, Wood County Coalition on Aging and helping grandparents who are raising children. Or, working with the theater department at Bowling Green State University or, PBE and just like a plethora of different companies and organizations who are all coming together for the same reason. And I think that is just what draws me to it and what keeps me going is that every day is different. Along with that, is there's so much to learn still and so much to, you know, dig deeper into. And I really like the challenge of kind of like, okay, why am I convincing this specific group of people that this matters, right? So, like, how can I tie in what they do, what they like, where their hobbies are, where their interests lie into the work that I'm doing? And how can I, bridge that gap and make it matter to them at least?
And that's a really great lead in to something that I was thinking about, and something that I wanted to ask you this evening is that, I think that there is the majority of us, there's a large group of us that don't condone violence.
Right.
That we want to live in a violence-free community, right? Whether that's for ourselves, whether that's for our children, whether that's for future generations. But I think that there's also sometimes this feeling of, well, I can't do anything about that, right? Like I want to do something, but or my little part isn't gonna make a difference. It isn't gonna change. It isn't gonna create these safe communities. And so, what would be your answer to that, for somebody who feels like, there's yes, I'd love to do something, but it's really bigger than me, and I can't. There's not much I can do to change that.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, everyone plays their part. Everyone has a voice and a, turn in preventing violence. I think what is so important is to realize that even indirect actions do affect our community. So think of like a job site, for example, and like you said, saying, "Oh, we don't condone violence, like we don't tolerate it." But it takes, one situation or, one event to occur to kind of almost show that it does matter. And obviously, we don't want job sites or organizations to have that one thing happen because, that is not what we are, hoping, but we are, trying to equip people with the knowledge for if that one thing were to happen. Or, it's that idea of like it could happen to you. In any sense of the word, right? Like someone or you personally can be affected by domestic or sexual violence. And so at the end of the day, we all play a part in preventing it. And also, we all play so many roles in our life, right? We are not just employees. We are also parents or sisters and brothers or friends or, volunteers. And within each of our roles in our lives, we carry different responsibilities. And so, you have the ability to make that difference in each role of your life, right? In each role in your life. So what you say matters, what you do matters, and it can have a trickle down effect on something within the community. And so when you look at it that way and how can I equip myself to be prepared and ready and have the tools in each of these roles in my life, then you can kind of see the bigger picture of why it matters that you specifically do your part in preventing violence.
So, how would you define prevention? So, for the folks that are watching today, or when you're out and you're having, educational talks in different areas of the community, how do you define prevention?
Yeah, so by the book, general definition of prevention is to stop something from happening, right? It is to do an action to stop another action from occurring. When you look at it in the realm of the work we do and in the lens of domestic and sexual violence, prevention is life-saving. It is, crucial. And to define it in the work we do, it is practicing um, using your tools in your life to protect yourself and to protect others and to kind of show that you do not condone violence, right? It is using the information you have and what you have learned to then, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your classmates about what you've learned and to kind of plant that seed in, making this violence-free prevention grow, violence-free community grow in a sense.
So if I'm somebody who's thinking about, so I've just heard you talk about, there's lots of things that stand out to me. So I just heard you talk about, prevention is, like you said, stopping something before it occurs, right? So that's, prevention is about like taking the knowledge that I have and then sharing it with other people so that the knowledge continues to spread.
Yes.
I mean, one of the other things that I heard you say is that it really is a community-wide effort, that it's not Piper's work and Piper's mission, right? It's not Cocoon's mission, but it's very much a community-wide effort if we are truly going to create these violence-free communities. And then lastly, the other thing that I believe that I heard you say is that like everybody can do something. Right.
Right.
So regardless of how I feel about like I'm just this little small pebble, right, in this really big lake, like what am I, what's my little part gonna do? That it actually does more than I think than we think. That we are, all of those little actions can start moving the needle, and creating those safe communities and, potentially stopping violence before it occurs. So if I'm hearing those things and I'm thinking, oh, yeah, like I'd like to do something. So where do I start? Like, what does that look like for me if I'm like, oh yeah, I'd love to have some tools and some things to do, to be, more actively, doing prevention work in my world, in my circle, in my community.
Yeah, I think the first step is to just um think about your why, right? Like why does it matter to you? Why do you want to, call up the Cocoon to request a prevention training? Or why do you think it is important in your workplace, in your community, in your class? Because prevention only goes so far if you aren't, 100% believing in it, if that makes sense. If you don't like realize why you think it is so important. And so I think just kind of considering your why and understanding, you know, and a lot of that could be I want my community to be safe. I want to have the tools if domestic or sexual violence were to occur in my workplace or in my classroom. And then once you do that, I would say, reach out to those resources, right? Reach out to the Cocoon, talk to people who may have, already established prevention efforts in their areas, in their spaces. And it's all about conversation, right? It goes back to that idea of spreading the knowledge, right? Um, and I think the first step to prevention, understanding why it is so important. And then the second step is to just ask, right? To talk about, you might not have all the buzzer words. You might not say, like, oh, I want to host a bystander intervention training at my workplace. But, just having that conversation and saying, like, hey, I want to be prepared for if this were to happen, or I want to know what to say if someone tells me this is going on. And then, I am more than happy to have that conversation and work with people to realize where their areas of need lie, and kind of what makes the most sense within their spaces and where prevention is most needed.
Oh, great. Thank you. I think that kind of thinking through, I think that why is really important, right? Kind of thinking through, what does it mean for me to be out and doing the prevention work? And so I want to switch a little bit, and change directions just a little bit and talk about, I mean, you started to talk about things like bystander intervention. You shared earlier in your introduction about all of the different places that you are in the community, hosting these conversations, having these conversations, giving the tools, to folks, who are there to be, part of that educational programming. And it reminds me of something. I'm kind of really talking about the significance of prevention and prevention work in our community, specifically as it relates to domestic and sexual violence. So I had, many years ago, I had the opportunity to go through a sort of master's level, educational curriculum around gender-based violence. And I'll never forget, on the first day they had this activity, and they had these little circles, of paper that were on the table. And so they had them spread out all around the table, and they told us to start writing down all of the things that we think about when we think about doing work with survivors. So whether it was a narrative that a survivor shared with you that kind of stuck with you, but what are those things? What are the stories that you've heard? And write on each one, comment on each one of those circles. So we did that. And then they had us go and put them up on this like big piece of paper that was on the wall. And then what we realized was, because we were buried in doing the work and weren't really paying attention to what was going on around us, is what we realized is that they had created an island. So they took all those big pieces of paper, and when they put them together, there was this drawing of this island, and there were an incredible amount of these round notes that were on there. And so, we talked about the fact that each one of those notes represents a survivor experience, right? That we either was our own experience, a survivor that we helped, a person that we knew, right? Whatever that was. And then what we realized is that the island was very full, right? Because we
Hmm.
know that just unfortunately the prevalence of domestic and sexual violence is great. But if I took one of those circles off, because I helped this one person, right? So we get them to the island of nonviolence, right? So I get you, I help you, I provide you with all the support, and I get you to the island of nonviolence. Guess what's going to happen? There's just another person that's going to move in to the island of violence, right? Because we haven't stopped the violence at the source, right? And so, as much as we can move all of these people off of the island, and get them to this island over here, there's still going to be a whole long line, unfortunately and tragically, of people that are going to experience violence and end up on the island. And I think that that to me is sort of the epitome of why violence prevention is so important and why not one or two people can do it, right? Not one agency alone, not one person alone, but all of us collectively can eventually, hopefully, start to make that island be a deserted island, right? Like there isn't anybody that's joining that. And so
Exactly.
there are lots of ways to do that, right? And I think that's where your programming pieces come in. And so I want to talk a little bit about there's a few things that I know that you do and provide to the community. One of them that I know that we are super excited about because it's brand new for us is our Darkness to Light program. And so very thankful to Medical Mutual, who saw our vision about wanting to bring the Darkness to Light program to Wood County and has provided us with some funding to be able to not only receive the training necessary to facilitate the Darkness to Light program, but then also be able to go out and start providing that, that training and that knowledge and that programming to individuals out in our community. So can you talk a little bit about like what is Darkness to Light? Why was it so important for us to partner with Medical Mutual to bring it to our community?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for, sharing that story about kind of visualizing prevention in that sense, and then leading me into my programming. I appreciate it. So Darkness to Light, I'm super, super excited about. Over, this past year, I've had the privilege of training to become a facilitator for Stewards of Children, which is a Darkness to Light training program. And essentially, it is geared towards preventing child sexual abuse. And the demographic for this training is everyone. A lot of times, these trainings are centered around specific majors or jobs or specific types of people who typically see this work more. What we do at the Cocoon, law enforcement, teachers, the people who are kind of involved in that more. This training specifically is geared towards your run-of-the-mill adult, right? The librarian at your local library, or the Boy Scouts of America leader, or a soccer coach. It's just kind of your run-of-the-mill average person wanting to know how they can prevent child sexual abuse. And I really like it because
I think we might have lost Piper.
with a plethora of different people in the community to talk about child sexual abuse and preventing child sexual abuse. Kathy, you're muted. Sorry.
No, that's not going to help anybody. Nobody's going to be able to hear me. So thank you so much for that. So yeah, that happened. So thank you. I mean, so much for sharing a little bit about like the program and really who it's intended for. I mean, I liked when you were talking about the fact that there are a lot of again going back to how do we as a community become involved in prevention. That maybe I'm not somebody who regularly works with survivors of childhood sexual abuse, right? But I may come across children who may choose to disclose, right? I may be, my own children, right? Kind of learning those kinds of things. And so talking a little bit about like if I what does that program look like? Like if I'm gonna think about either joining a program or bringing a program to my agency organization, my book club, right? That I want to bring you in to
Mhm.
kind of talk about that. Like, can you talk through a little bit about sort of like the logistics of what that program looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Darkness to Light is a 2.5 hour training. You are provided with a workbook that you are actively filling out as you go on. So, it's very discussion based. It's very, you know, it ties to your life and your role as an adult and where you kind of those little worlds that we talked about, right? Like you're a parent and you're a soccer coach and this is your job and you work with children. So it kind of is very, very personalized to your life. And it kind of then ends up becoming this almost guideline of you fill out this workbook and at the end you now have something to look back on if you were to ever come across a situation. Within that training as well is you are hearing from real survivors of child sexual abuse. You are hearing their stories, you are hearing what they've gone through, what they would have wished would, the support they wish they would have gotten, and also what helped them throughout it. So it's kind of it's a mix between hearing from people's stories and then how can you then relay that information in your own lives and in your roles.
So what is if what for you as the person who is, providing this opportunity to people in the community, what is one skill out of I'm sure many, one skill or one takeaway that is a goal of that program that you want people and participants to walk away with?
Yeah, I think so far what I've seen is reflecting on what you can do and the changes you can make in your policies. You know, I've had trainings where people have gone, we don't have policies for if this happens, or we don't have a list of things we need to be doing if a child were to disclose to us. We don't have, I had a training at a library and they were like, we have rooms where the children are alone and unaccompanied, and changing the layout of their space. And it really gets people thinking about what they can do in with the control that they have to prevent child sexual abuse. And I think that is my main goal is to, take this information and then apply it to yourself, right? Because, I can sit up there and I can lecture and I can talk about how important it is to prevent child sexual abuse. But what I'd rather do is give you the tools to then prevent it yourselves.
Is there a so there's there what I'm hearing is there's a component or a piece of the darkness to light training that is about kind of that true prevention aspect. So the example that you gave about, can I set the quiet rooms up in my library differently, right? That provide that added layer of sort of security, safety, protection. And so some of those things that I can do to kind of again be the eyes and ears before something happens.
Yep.
Is there a piece of the darkness to light training that talks about and you mentioned this earlier about if I become a safe person for a child, right? So again, we'll use the library example. So I go to the library 2, 3, 4 times a week, and I formed this relationship with the children's librarian, right? Like they seem super friendly and I like them, and I like to listen and sit in when they're reading stories and doing all of those kinds of things. So one day I walk up to the librarian and I say, this is happening at home. Is there a piece in that training that kind of helps those individuals know what to do when you do have a child that chooses to disclose?
Absolutely, yes. So the training is centered around kind of 5 steps to helping children who disclose sexual abuse. So it kind of gives you the appropriate language to use when a child is talking to you about their experiences. And then it also, I've worked with Darkness to Light to create a community resource page of, what are now the steps you can take to reporting it, even if you're not a mandated reporter, like what can you do to help protect this child? What can you say and, how can you kind of mitigate the situation with what you have control of? And so there is definitely that aspect of kind of a game plan, so to say.
Hmm. And I
And I
think
think,
that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I'm so sorry.
No.
I was just going to mention too that within rolling out this training, like I've said, I've gotten to work with so many different people in different agencies and different communities that, they come to me and they say like, we want to be, help for children. We want to be those role models and we want to be those safe people, but we just don't know how, right? Am I saying the wrong things? Am I doing, the wrong things? And that kind of goes back to that why. It's like, why do you want to do the prevention work? And I think Darkness to Light is a great tool to start that conversation and to give people the resources. So then, hopefully they don't need the cocoon, Hopefully they can then take this information and practice it themselves. I also recently found out that I am the only trainer in like a 4-hour radius in the area. And so I've been also, that's been really cool to talk to people that usually we don't get to talk to outside of Wood County, giving this training, making those connections, which has been really cool too.
Well, thank you for that. You answered my question before I asked it. So I was going to ask a question that was the answer to my question. And so I do also know that, Darkness to Light is one of a couple, I think, recommended curriculums to be used to have the conversation around, child sexual abuse and what to do in a preventative and also in a capacity when folks disclose. And I think and we know that that also really lines up well with Aaron's Law, which was a law that was passed in Ohio over in the last couple of years. And so, can you talk a little bit about that? Can you talk a little bit about Aaron's Law and then sort of how this fits with that?
Absolutely, yeah. So, Aaron's Law is a law that was passed in Ohio that requires school children K through 12 to learn about child sexual abuse and to learn about, preventing child sexual abuse in their own lives, right? So, I have had the wonderful opportunity to work with the schools in the area and to also work with the Ohio Alliance for Sexual Violence to kind of create some programming that tackles those things, right? Healthy relationships, bystander intervention, red and green flags, power and control. I've even worked with like kinders and first graders talking about like safe adults and safe touches and, red and green flags. So it's been really wonderful to kind of be a help to the schools. So within that programming and what we do at the Cocoon, it helps the students learn how, things they can do to prevent dangerous situations. But then, the adults in their lives aren't getting that training, right? They are not getting that side of things. And at the end of the day, adults are responsible for children. We are responsible for protecting children. There's only so much that a child can do to protect themselves. Until an adult has to step in and finish the work. So, Darkness to Light really provides them with the tools and kind of gets children and adults on the same wavelength of like, here's what we're both doing, here's both of our responsibilities to all together prevent child sexual abuse.
I remember, so Aaron Marin, who is the kind of the driving voice behind Aaron's Law. So for those of you who are not familiar, she unfortunately experienced, sexual abuse as a child for many, many years when she was growing up. And so she when kind of made it her life's work to hopefully put some things in place that prevent that from, occurring for children in the future. And so, yeah, that's Aaron's Law is named for her. And so she's been going around the country, trying to get all of the states to enact Aaron's Law. And we, Ohio, jumped on that several years ago. But I remember at one point when I heard her speak about the importance of Aaron's Law and really kind of what the expectation is for schools and communities. And she shared a story of is that, she was out in a community meeting, not in Ohio, so to be really clear, it was not here. But she had been out in a community meeting talking about the importance of Aaron's Law, and there were a few folks in that meeting who said, I really I appreciate it. I think it's a great conversation, but I really don't think that we need that because I know that the people in my life would come to me and tell me if something had happened to them. Like I'm confident that, I've had this conversation. I'm confident that they would come and talk to me about it. And I just don't think that, I don't see why I would, be something that I would need to participate in, right? That kind of thing. And so fast forward, there was programming that happened in a school of a child that she knew. And that child came home and said, or left school, I guess she came, she left the school and after school, and she went to this adult and said, "Hey, I got to tell you something," and then disclosed childhood sexual abuse. And I think that, and the message in that is that I think that not that the child didn't feel safe with that adult, but again, didn't have the language, the knowledge, the tools, the things to know how to say to somebody, "This is happening to me and I need somebody to know," right? But the fact that the child was able to get some of that education and have that conversation in a safe setting at school, then really, made them feel more confident about go finding their safe person and then disclosing, right? And so I think that,
Right.
again, that power of those conversations.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point where, sometimes we just truly have to educate people to say this isn't okay. You shouldn't be experiencing this. No, like you shouldn't be experiencing this. No one deserves to be experiencing this. And like you said, just equipping them with the language
Mhm.
of what that looks like and being able to advocate for themselves, and what you bring up with the person who was like, "Oh, everyone in my life would feel safe talking to me." Like that is a barrier that I face like plenty of times in this community, where people are like, "Oh, it doesn't happen here," or "I've never heard of, something like that to happen." But it simply maybe you didn't have the appropriate tools to be able to notice if something like that is happening. And it kind of goes back to the idea of not one person isn't responsible for doing everything, but everybody has to do something. It takes everybody being equipped with that language, those tools, and kind of having that like radar going of noticing and reflecting on actions and behaviors around them to then be able to identify that no, that isn't okay, or no, I should tell someone about this, or oh, I know that this person will understand what I'm saying if I disclose to them. You and I know that the number one barrier to disclosure of any form of domestic and sexual violence is stigma.
Mhm.
We don't want to make people feel bad about sharing what is happening to them. We don't want to make people think like it's their fault, or we don't want to have people, not be able to trust the people in their life to talk about it. And I think talking about what it looks like and talking about how to identify it tackles that stigma. And it shows like, hey, it doesn't matter, what you did nothing wrong. What matters is that now you are able to identify that there is something wrong, and we are going to help you in the best way we can.
Mhm. Absolutely. And so I know that you've talked about Darkness to Light and the importance that it has in the community and helping kind of drive these conversations, right? You've talked a lot about the work that you're doing in the school. So I've heard you say like I can work with kindergartners and talking about safe touches all the way up to high schoolers. I know that you were in Bowling Green High School this week, and so being able to have conversations with high schoolers, and then we're doing work at the university. I think that there's a lot of work that you've been doing also at Bowling Green State University around prevention. So, I mean, the school is one place that I think that is really a great place to have these kinds of conversations and bring this programming. But I also heard you say there's a lot of other places in the community that can benefit from this kind of programming as well. I know you talked about, local businesses and going in and having conversations in local businesses about prevention. So you talked about, I think, the Wood County Committee on Aging. And so, social service agencies are a great place to come in and have these kinds of conversations. And so the couple other things that I just wanted to touch on before we open it up for questions, and see what folks will have some questions for is I heard you talk a lot about bystander intervention. So can you talk a little bit, kind of, condensed version of, for those who do not know what bystander intervention is?
Yeah, absolutely. So we may have all heard the term see something, say something. Bystander intervention is see something and do something, right? So if we do not address unhealthy behaviors when they occur, then we become complicit in it. So if we see, sexual or domestic violence occurring in our community and we don't intervene in a way that is impactful and safe, then we are saying indirectly that it's okay that it's happening. So bystander intervention gives people the tools and also the confidence to be able to step into a situation um, when they see it occurring. Now, with bystander intervention, like I'm not, asking people to get in the middle of a fight and break it up and, be the hero in that situation because we obviously don't want to put you in a place of danger. But it kind of formulates like to your personality and what you can do with what you're confident in to prevent violence or to stop violence when you see it occurring. Whether this is who are the resources you could go to tell someone that this is happening, or how can you maybe distract someone in a situation like that to then be able to pull them aside and ask them how they like if they need help and how you can help them. So it really kind of is a very situational concept. It's not going to be the same actions or script or tools each time, but there is so many things that we can do as community members to put a stop to violence when we see it in our various roles.
So it sounds like bystander intervention is kind of universal.
Absolutely.
So could I use it in a business setting,
Absolutely.
school setting, right?
Yes.
What about a bar?
Absolutely.
So something that we can take the concept and sort of carry it out in all of the places in our community. I mean, I think that what I also hear you saying is that I think that for those of us who are like I don't know what to do, the bystander intervention sort of takes away some of that fear and that anxiety, and that can be used in multiple places that I myself might find myself in just the course of my daily life.
Exactly. I think sometimes bystander intervention, just like the term or the definition of the word, can kind of put that pressure on someone to be like, it's my responsibility solely to stop violence. When actually we are just equipping everyone with the tools to call out violence when we see it occur so that it doesn't occur again.
Absolutely. So. And then a last thing I just want to touch on, and then we'll open it up for questions. I know that there's another set of programming that you all have been working on that's called the Champions of Change program, which also is a prevention program. So could you just kind of touch on that a little bit for everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have had the wonderful privilege to work with Robin, our Director of Development and Communications, to kind of promote this Champions of Change program, which is a business-centered prevention program. So what we do is we work closely with different job sites and businesses in Wood County, and once again go back to that why is prevention important for you and what are your immediate needs? What are you seeing as management or a supervisor of, situations that are happening either within the workplace or outside of the workplace, but is affecting your employees? And how can we kind of tackle that through your business's lens, right? Where does it make most sense for us to come in and discuss these things? Does that look like changing the policy of your businesses and kind of coming up with a game plan if someone were to disclose domestic or sexual violence? Or does it look like coming in for a training on how we can practice trauma-informed care within our businesses or workplace bystander intervention? Or even, maybe you might not be able to define domestic or sexual violence. So, what does that even look like? What does that even mean when we say that? And, once again, equipping people with that language to then recognize it and do their part in preventing it. So I, have learned a lot throughout this program, and every time we work with a business, we continue to grow and grow and grow the program and develop it to really become a personalized training program for each and every business we've had the privilege of working with.
And I think that there are different, and you talked about this at the beginning, that there are different places that we find ourselves in our lives regularly, right? Different spaces, different places. And one of them is our workplaces. That many of us are showing up in our workplaces on a regular basis, whether it's, a 5-day work week or whether it's a couple times a week, whatever that looks like. And I think that, as an employee, knowing that I'm going to a workplace that doesn't tolerate violence, that creates a safe space for me to show up to work, I think is something that a lot of folks would appreciate and kind of expect, right? That we want to be in safe workplaces. But I think what we also know is that because domestic and sexual violence is so prevalent, that there are lots of survivors that are going to work every day. And how do we equip businesses and spaces to be able to support those folks when they show up? And so I think that is some really critical work that you are doing and getting out and having those conversations. And kudos and thank you to the businesses that I know have already partnered with you to go through that process and have that conversation. So do you
Exactly.
my last question before we open it up for questions? Do you ever sleep? Because I hear all of
That's
these things that you're doing and kind of living and breathing prevention work. Do you do something that is not not this work?
I do, yeah. So, I am currently in my master's program, which I know might sound like more work, but truly it has been wonderful to kind of develop my education personally instead of being the teacher, being the student and learning more. I am in my master's program for social work with a specialization in public health. So, kind of once again tackling those bigger communities. It's been wonderful to continue to learn and to grow my knowledge. I am also a dance teacher outside of this workspace. So I work with kiddos teaching musical theater dance and directing shows and stuff, which has been super fun. Um, And, as someone who also teaches compassion fatigue and burnout, I know it is super important to fill your cup up. And, you won't be able to provide for people unless you have energy to do so. And you have you don't lose that passion to do so. So I am a very avid reader. I'm a very avid crafter. I am the kind of person that, being busy is my relaxation, being able to do different things does fill my cup up. So I don't know if sleep is the right word, but I know recharge is for sure.
I like that. So good for you.
Yes.
I'm glad that you have
Thank
have
you.
ways to do that because I think I agree with you. I
Yes.
think that's really important. So, all right. Well, Robin, I believe, has been moderating and watching some questions. So Robin, may I invite you to join us and let us know if we have any questions from our guests today?
Sure. Hello, everyone. We do have a question that is kind of a broader picture, right? If you could share with us some common myths about domestic and or sexual violence that you wish people understood more, just out in your general conversations, some of the things that you've heard um, that we could share.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for the question, whoever asked it. I think the first myth is that it doesn't happen here, which is unfortunately not true. Kathy and I talked a lot about the prevalence of domestic and sexual violence and how, more often than not, someone knows someone who has been affected by domestic and sexual violence. And, you know, when you look at the statistics of domestic and sexual violence, it kind of unfortunately proves that it does happen here and it doesn't matter the community you come from. It doesn't matter, the places you find yourself in. It is too prevalent to not exist in those spaces. And so I think when you realize that, you kind of then can consider the fact that you do have a role in preventing domestic and sexual violence. I think another myth is that domestic and sexual violence is solely physical, which isn't true. And I think, with doing prevention education, and a lot of mine is more based on that emotional side of things. It's like, how can we behaviorally and emotionally and, with our language prevent domestic and sexual violence? I think a third myth is that domestic and sexual violence only affect the immediate survivor. And that is also not true. It affects their children, their family members, the people in their close circles. And so, really looking at those secondary survivors and giving them the tools and the language as well to be able to, have a seat in the room and have their voice heard, is just as important as addressing the needs of the direct survivor.
Great, thank you. We do have a Facebook viewer that is asking if you have any dream projects that you would like to work on.
I do. So I have been working really closely with our sexual violence advocate and our communications team to develop a training program for alcohol serving establishments in Wood County. That is something that um, surprisingly is not super prevalent in Ohio. There's not really a ton of programs that specifically talk about domestic and sexual violence in alcohol serving establishments. So it's been a really wonderful experience to get to talk to people from Wood County Hospital and to talk to people across the state and even across the country about their programs and about what they are seeing in their communities. And I think with Bowling Green specifically being a college town, I think there is definitely a need for addressing um, this side of prevention. And so I think right now that's my dream project. But once again, that changes every day. I've had, requests from some companies or, areas of discipline that I just don't know anything about. So I really do get the opportunity to research it and to learn more about it, which has been really cool. So, yeah.
Cool. So another question. that has come across. So what are some early warning signs of unhealthy relationship actions? That may be red flags, as we say, right? That people could be a little bit more aware of in their surroundings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of, one of the red flags that I talk about in the classroom specifically that always kind of shocks people a little bit is fighting fairly. So people often say that like, oh, healthy relationships, fights don't happen, or, disagreements never happen. Like that's how you know you found your person. But at the end of the day, we're all human. We've got stressors. Life happens, and sometimes arguments can occur from that. And so what's important is to fight fairly, as I say, to give people the space to share their opinion, to share their side of the story, and then to also come to an agreement at the end of it, a resolution, whether that looks like we're going to take 10 minutes and sit in separate rooms and just cool off and then we'll talk about it, or, we're going to, maybe focus on something else for the moment. And just to, avoiding name calling, avoiding unnecessary digs at people, but still being able to have an argument effectively, if that makes sense. Um, I think another red flag that is kind of newer to students, not newer, but is surprising to students is isolation and jealousy. So, we see a lot of relationships where people, oh, I don't like you hanging out with that person, or oh, I don't like you going there, or I don't like when you're on this. And a lot of times that is misunderstood as, oh, they're protective, or oh, they are, they care about me. But, you are your own person. You have your own autonomy, and you shouldn't be told where you can go, what you can do if it is not hurting someone else. So would say that's another red flag in an unhealthy relationship is just isolation and harmful jealousy.
Great. So, um, we have answered and asked and answered all the questions. Sorry. So if there's anybody out there today that is looking for more information about getting connected to darkness to light training, or there's a business out there that's looking maybe for some Champions of Change programming, how would they go about contacting and who at the Cocoon to get that
Yeah.
information?
You are more than welcome to contact me. So, you are more than welcome to share my email out there. It is p.nelson@thecocoon.org. I am always willing to set up a meeting with someone, talk about someone, kind of hear what they need or what they are envisioning for their school, their place of employment, their club, organization, whatnot. Our website, thecocoon.org, is also a great place to learn more about the programming. If this video is your first introduction to some of the things we do. So also our hotline is kind of our one-stop shop for a lot of information. So feel free to call 419-373-1730 to speak to me or someone else who can give you a little more information about the work that we do on the prevention side of things.
Great. Thanks, Piper. I'll turn it back over to Kathy and you to round us out for the night. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Robin.
All right. Well, thank you, Robin, for jumping in and taking care of those questions for us. And thank you to all of you who submitted questions. If you have a question that you didn't think to ask tonight while we're together, or if you didn't have the opportunity to be able to watch this live and you're listening to it later and you have a question, I know that Piper would absolutely welcome the opportunity to be able to answer those questions and have a conversation around whatever it is that you would like to learn some more information about. So we will make sure that we link Piper's information down at the bottom of this Facebook Live feed so that you can go back and reference it as Piper shared. So I want to thank you all all for joining us again tonight. We apologize for the little bit of a late start, but we hope that you've enjoyed the opportunity to get a little bit more of an insider look in the prevention work that we are doing at the Cocoon in ways that we're getting out and trying to prevent violence before it occurs and really sort of rallying our community around that. I also want to thank you, Piper, for taking time out of your evening tonight to spend it with us. And so hopefully you've got some of those things to recharge planned as you go home and enjoy the rest of your evening. But before we wrap up, I have one last question that I want to ask you. So if there is one thing that you want people to know, understand about the importance of violence prevention in our communities, what would that be? And I'll give you, if you got to think about it for a second, but what is that one takeaway, one message, if that was the only thing that you could share?
I think I'm going to reiterate that one person is not responsible for doing everything, but everybody is responsible for doing something.
Wonderful. So, well, thank you all again for joining us tonight. We hope that you all enjoy the rest of your evening as well. And stay tuned. We will have another edition of Inside the Impact coming up. And so we'll get some more information out about that and hope that you will all be able to join us for our next one. So, everyone, take care. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.